Up next, we have Dr. Stephanie Cunningham. So, Dr. Cunningham, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen while I do your intro, you can go ahead and start doing that.
Sounds good.
All right. Dr. Stephanie Cunningham serves as a psychologist in the Department of Mental Health Services in the IU School of Medicine. Her work focuses on providing direct clinical care to the School of Medicine's wide range of medical learners. Prior to joining the IU School of Medicine, she served as a staff psychologist in the Counseling Center at the University of Southern Indiana, where she provided psychotherapy services, consultation, supervision, administration of the Counseling Center's outreach and programming initiatives, and coordination of the center's clinical training program for master's level graduate students. She earned her master's degree in clinical psychology at Morehead State University and her PhD in counseling psychology, as well as graduate certificate in women's studies at the University of Akron. She completed her pre-doctoral internship at the Counseling Center at Ball State University. Welcome, Dr. Cunningham.
Great, thank you so much. Everybody can see me okay and hear me okay, and like the slides are pulled up and all that jazz. All right, sweet. That's always like the most anxiety provoking part of this experience, is just making sure that the tech works the way that it's supposed to. Also, never ever get tired of hearing my bio be read. The novelty of that never wears off. I do presentations and things on the regular, and it's just like, nothing makes me feel special like having some other person like recite back what I have accomplished in my life. It's good stuff. You should try it sometime. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. This is my second time at the firm conference, and I really, really love and appreciate having these opportunities to engage with medical learners. I got to tell you though, like it's really kind of a bummer though to be doing it virtually. It's definitely better than nothing, but one of my favorite things about presenting is trying to be funny. And like with this format, like I just don't get that singular pleasure of trying to be funny while you all just then stare at me while crickets chirp in the background. So I'm just going to have to pretend that that's what happens. Like that you're just going to stare at me awkwardly when I make these comments, because really it's not that different from how it normally would be. All right, y'all. So to start things off, we are going to embrace the weirdness, right? Like I just want to take a moment at the outset of our conversation to acknowledge that we are finding ourselves still in the midst of what all of my peeps know that I call at every possible opportunity dumpster fire 2020. Although now it's the dumpster fire 2020 new extended mix, fresh for 2021. Because even though technically it's a new year, it really is just the same old nonsense. So that's why I like thinking of it as the new extended mix of dumpster fire 2020. So I've done a number of Zoom presentations over the past year. Like I'm telling you, in some ways they are really, really great. Like I really appreciate getting to sit the whole time because I'm lazy. But they're really, really hard to make engaging. Like it's the nature of the format, I think. So my solemn commitment to you all today is that I'm going to try to make this not suck. But as those of us who are old people used to say back in the day, like when the internet was still dial up and whatnot, your mileage may vary, but I'm going to try. All right. So some introductory stuff. You got to hear in my beautiful bio that I love a little bit about my background there and whatnot. So I have been part of the staff of the Department of Mental Health Services here at IUSM for about 2.5 years at this point, and have specialized in working in higher education settings. I just really, really love like having that opportunity to work with folks who are in the midst of their education and training. And so in my work at DMHS, like one of the biggest things that I hear about depression, anxiety, things that you would imagine would be the case. But another really big theme that comes out in the clinical work that I do is a lot of interpersonal drama, a lot of interpersonal angst, a lot of social phobia, things of that nature. And like that kind of stuff, that interpersonal angst comes out in even the best of times. And we are most definitely not in the best of times right now. So I think it's really important to have these opportunities to kind of like be uh, the best version of ourselves that we can be in the present historical moment that is Dumpster Fire 2020 extended remix version. And I think having the opportunity to learn some new skills is an important part of that. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We are first going to set some historical context for the hot, hot mess in which we find ourselves, right? So like, were you aware that there's a loneliness epidemic going on and that it was a thing even before COVID came to make things suck even more than they already do at present? And then we're going to talk about why that matters, why loneliness is something that we should care about, like regardless of whether that's something that you personally are feeling the effects of. And then we're going to talk about some practical stuff about relationships. So, like, maybe you are totally crushing it at relationships, you're great at it, and you just want to help some of the shy folks in your life be better at it. Or maybe you are the shy folks and you want to learn how to develop interpersonal connections more effectively. Maybe right now you're just stuck in quarantine and the firm conference seemed like the most reasonable way to spend some time. Like, whatever the reason that brought you here today, you're going to learn about some actionable things you can do to become more effective at cultivating interpersonal connection. So, as I said, there's more than one epidemic going on. And well before COVID showed up and turned day to day life into what fundamentally is like a live action role play of Groundhog Day every day, there was evidence that we were already experiencing a loneliness epidemic. So there's scores of articles on social isolation, on feelings of disconnection from community and from loved ones, like this pervasive sense of alienation that people were experiencing. So, like, here's just three that are tiny sampling of what is out there in the research and popular articles about this experience of the loneliness epidemic that was pretty prominent in the literature even before we got into 2020. So, loneliness was a big deal before, and post COVID, it's gotten worse. So, there's a couple of graphs. I like me some pictures. So, you can see this is a report share of Americans who reported being lonely in 2019. And already, those are some pretty horrifyingly high numbers. And then they looked at during COVID how that experience of loneliness was affected as a result of the pandemic. And so, like, you can see like how that shifted, that we were pretty lonely before, that it was indeed kind of an epidemic. And now the pandemic has dialed that up an even more notable amount. So, like, see from these graphs, the majority of folks, regardless of demographic group, they'd already had some degree of difficulty with loneliness. Like, it was something that was a source of concern for them before we all then started, everything got canceled and we were all living in quarantine. So interesting. I think this stuff is fascinating, by the way. I'm nerdtastic in that way. So uh, this stuff really matters, that it is well documented as a social determinant of health. Like, it has all of these impacts that have, again, been really well established in the literature around its impact on things like blood pressure, immune functioning, like inflammation. And then the part that really blows my mind is the extent to which it impacts physical health in a way that's comparable to some of these other really well-studied risk factors, including things like obesity, physical inactivity, air pollution, and this is my most stupefying bit of info that I have learned in my study of this. The negative effect on health of loneliness and social disconnection is congruent with the effect of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So, like, this is a legitimate source of concern. Like I said, it's not just a bummer that people don't have the kind of connections that they want. Like, this is something that we need to be cognizant of when it comes to like overall physical health and wellness. But above and beyond that too, it's got the kind of effect that you would expect on things like anxiety and depression as well. So, like, really, the point with all of this, like, that I think is interesting, hopefully you find it at least marginally valuable, is that as a society, we were not doing great with this to begin with, and with COVID, it has gotten so much worse. So, specifically for all y'all going into medicine, in the field of medicine, like beyond these general human things around physical wellness, there's really interesting research around social connectedness and its value for physicians in particular. And so this was something that I was interested in
fact that we may have COVID.
even before the pandemic because of like what the literature base shows around the effect that social connection has for physicians when it comes to preventing burnout and mitigating the risk of physician suicide. So, like that is part of why it's my understanding of why firm exists as an organization, why the conference is so important is like having that sense of connectedness and being a part of a community and feeling like you're able to rely on peers for support uh, makes a difference in quality of life and in one's ability to be able to sustain healthy functioning, even in the midst of this really corrosive experience of medical training residency. So now that you all hopefully are adequately horrified by some of this that come from struggling with lack of social connection, experience of loneliness, we're going to talk about the thing that everybody always brings up when I want to talk about these kinds of things, which is social media. So if you feel like you want to bust out that argument that like, no, that totally meets my need for social connectedness because I've got all these friends on the Facebook. Sorry, like it doesn't cut it. So social media is great in some ways. Like it is great for things like finding niche communities, right? So like if you are a fan of like a particular super obscure band, awesome. Like you can find connections with other folks all over the world who also listen to that band. Or if you've got a significant chronic health condition and you want to connect with other people struggling with that, but it's kind of rare, like being able to find a community of people online via social media who can provide that support remotely. Like that's wonderful. It's also great for professional networking. It's a wonderful way to develop those relationships and meet people with whom you would want to collaborate or to find out about job opportunities. And it's great as a starting place for in real life connections. All right, so getting to know people online and then eventually translating that into a more immediate and, during non-pandemic times, like in-person kind of connection. So sadly though, social media is terrible as an alternative to close connections. So the analogy that I'm gonna make about that is like having connections on social media is like eating junk food, right? Like you have that experience of eating and like it's enjoyable in the moment, but it's not nourishing. And so, like in one really interesting study, because I think they're all interesting, the researchers controlled participants' use of social media, and they found that the folks who were in the limited use condition showed significant reductions in loneliness and depression over the course of 3 weeks as compared to folks in the control group, which was like social media use as normal. So those findings really suggested that limiting your social media to approximately 30 minutes of use per day can lead to significant improvement in well-being. So rather than like spending more time on social media as a way to try to cultivate connection, limiting it to half an hour a day, which I think that's fair. Half an hour is about as much as you're going to need to be on any social media unless you've got other things going on that like are specific functions, like staying connected with a particular community versus just scrolling through your feed. It's something that does influence your well-being. So there is, of course, some research on friendships and how they work and how to get the most out of them. So that's what we're going to talk about now is what the research shows us on how close relationships develop. And so for some core elements of relationships, it's not that deep. It's not that complicated. So for example, proximity. right? So interacting with another human in some way, like, are you in each other's orbit somehow? Like whether that is literally physically around one another or part of the same kinds of communities or interacting on message boards or whatever, but like, is there some way in which that you are in one another's orbit? And is that happening with some degree of regularity? Like you've got to have opportunities to engage. So you're in each other's orbit and it happens with enough repeated exposure that kind of have some degree of familiarity that builds over time. The next thing is having some kind of shared activity, right? So whether if it's in the context of like, say, a work setting where you're involved in doing roughly the same kind of task, or if you have a shared interest and you've got something to bond over, if you're part of a particular community of some kind or volunteer group or faith community, that there's some kind of shared activity there that initially is a source of connection and bonding. Beyond those, the next piece is time devoted to their friendship, to the relationship. So you've got to, beyond just those things of like being in one another's orbit, having that happen repeatedly and having some kind of basis on which to interact, that there's some degree of intentionality in choosing to put time towards cultivating that. And then some self-disclosure, right? So it is where it becomes more of an active decision to invest that time and that energy by like choosing to pursue the connection, trying to develop the sense of connectedness versus just kind of like having it happen as a result of the familiarity that builds through repeated exposure. So, science of friendships here, because I'm sure y'all are as nerdy as I am, maybe nerdier. I don't know. I don't know your life. I figured you would enjoy learning what at least one study says is the amount of hours that people estimate that they need to invest in different levels of social connectedness before a particular relationship qualifies for that title. So science says you need to invest 75 hours of time together to develop a casual friendship. If you want to take it to the level of a legit friend, it's 112 hours. If you want to level that up again to a good friend, 223 hours. And like, if you're going to go for the gold for sure, 737 hours of time spent together, invested in that relationship to qualify as a best friend. So isn't that nice that science can tell us exactly how much time it takes to make these things happen? So like, obviously these are, the participants' estimates of the amount of time that they felt like it took to develop these relationships. This is not like objectively, empirically measured time that it has taken for these kinds of relationships to form, but it does give you an idea of like the relative amount of time and the amount of time that it takes to even start to develop a casual friendship. Like it is a genuine investment just at the baseline level of the amount of time, let alone anything that has to do with like the sense of like real investment of energy and care. So kind of along those lines, that stuff right there, like I say, those are the basic ingredients. Those are what are necessary but not sufficient. So here's some of the real active ingredients that make a relationship like truly close and something that's going to bring some of those benefits that we talked about earlier on. So the active ingredients are things like being willing to engage in some self-disclosure. Like you've got to be able to like have that willingness to be vulnerable with another human being and to trust them with information about yourself and your experience and the things that are important to you, and like being open to allowing another person to have some insight into your experience. But you've also got to be good at being able to assess other people's boundaries, right? So like what their level of readiness is for closeness, because it's about matching there. Like if somebody else makes clear that they want to move at a slower pace with developing connection, and you're all about putting your business out there on Front Street with your self-disclosure, it's not going to be a good match. It's going to be kind of uncomfortable for that person. Which leads into the next thing, which is attunement to the other person, right? So being able to like vibe with somebody. That comes down to being curious, like being interested in the other person and their experience and what's going on for them. And being able to read and respect the cues that they're putting out there about what their boundaries are, what they're comfortable with, what excites them, what they are all about. And like being attentive to those things in a way that allows you to then be able to share with them and like continue to build on that sense of connection. And then having some willingness to give of yourself. And what I mean with that is, like I keep saying, about the amount of time that it takes, as well as the amount of energy that you have to invest, because nobody likes a half-ass friend, and the amount of care that you have to be willing to put into it. Like you can't have a close relationship if you're not willing to invest emotionally in another person, to potentially be hurt, and to allow them to care about you. And so, like, those are things that are really important in being able to take that relationship from more of a casual acquaintance kind of level to more of a real in-depth and meaningful relationship. So for most people, like these things that I'm describing here come pretty naturally, right? Like if they don't, you may have an issue that gets in the way, like if you have social pragmatic communication disorder, something along those lines. But generally, in my experience, it's more likely that if people get stuck, that it's because they either don't appreciate the necessity of these things, or they allow their negative internal voice to persuade them not to do this stuff. So you are probably intuitively capable of doing these things, but if you find that you have difficulty with it, it's probably a learned experience. So here's some things that really don't help along those lines. Things that gum up the works, even if you are really interested in developing connection. So one of them is being excessively self-focused, right? Like being so focused on self-monitoring and not embarrassing yourself that you're not able to be attuned and be present and be curious. Or being excessively self-focused in the sense of just not having that curiosity about another person. Like that is absolutely an essential ingredient in being able to develop real closeness. Another thing that I found a lot over the past year is that folks were downplaying the value of the relationships that they were maintaining during the pandemic. It's like, oh, well, like it's really, we're only talking on Zoom. I never get to see my loved ones in real life. Like, it's just not as good as the real thing. Like, well, it's a start, and you're building foundations for what will happen in non-pandemic times. So back to those numbers, but the amount of time it takes to develop that kind of closeness, even if it is not the most fulfilling kind of experience at this point, it is really a foundation to be able to get to those deeper levels of intimacy. Like when we finally reopen the world and are once again in non-dumpster fire times. And then lots of times I find that folks are just spending a lot of energy worrying that they are not enough of something, right? They're not smart enough, they're not cool enough, they're not funny enough, whatever. So really, this really want to main takeaway message right here. You want to be a cat, right? Like you want to be self-confident, but not self-centered. You want to be curious, but not intrusive. You want to be involved, but have good boundaries. You want to know that you are an awesome you. And like, if somebody's not a fan, then that's cool. Like nobody's going to be everybody's cup of tea. But people do love someone who's comfortable in their own skin. Like people love somebody that is the most cat a cat could be. Right. So being authentic is the most expedient way to make connections. Like it is the best way to find out like what somebody else is about and to be able to form a true sense of connection that's not predicated upon some performative version of yourself. All right. So let's see, moving right along. We talked about those basic and active ingredients. You've got those in place. I'm trying to speed through since the internet being a punk cut into my rambling time here, which is extra bummer. But So here's some suggestions, specific things about trying to make those connections happen. Initiate contact. Like, don't just wait for other people to reach out to you. Take risks, put yourself out there, trust that other people are being real with you. If they seem interested in developing connection, like trust them that that's in fact the case. It's unreal to me how often folks have opportunities and don't pursue them because they allow that anxiety to get in the way. You want to find ways to put yourself out there, like meet people, whatever that looks like, even if it is just participating in communities on the internet. I've actually met more people during pandemic times than I had done in pre-pandemic times because I've been more intentional about trying to make those relationships happen. You want to keep coming back to the curiosity piece because you want to ask questions. You want to be interested in other people's story, right? Like think of it as like you're a journalist. You're trying to get the background, or everybody around you is some quirky character in an indie film. Like, what would you want to know about this quirky character? Like, what kinds of things would be useful to know about them and interesting to know about them? Just express that curiosity. There is nothing that makes more of a difference in developing that rapport and that sense of investment in a relationship like expressing curiosity. You want to be able to step outside of yourself as well. So I keep coming back to the idea of like these roles and the fact we all feel like the main character in our own movie, but everybody's the main character in their movie. So like being able to step outside of your experience and see yourself as a bit player in somebody else's movie and like being proactive and trying to develop connection is another piece that is really helpful in being able to take some risks. And you want to be okay, being good. This is a talk in and of itself right there. But another big piece that I see a lot is folks deciding that if they can't give their all to these relationships, these connections in their life, that they're just not going to do it at all. And you can still maintain connection without being as all in on it as you would prefer to do in times where you've got more resource of time and energy. So just letting people know that you're thinking about them, even if you can't like make time to chat, or letting people know that you're stupidly busy and that you really miss them, but you only have 10 minutes to chat while you're driving from point A to point B. Like people appreciate you being forthright about that, and they'll be less likely to make inaccurate attributions about why you're not giving them more of yourself. Just let people know what's up. And then last but not least, be patient with the process, right? Keep coming back to those number of hours that it takes to develop those relationships. Y'all are so impatient, like really. It takes a long time to develop even like a basic kind of acquaintanceship or even casual friendship. So just being as patient as possible with that process. All right, getting to the end here. Like really, everybody feels awkward in trying to develop close relationships. This is not just a you problem. You can get past some of that by emphasizing the things that you have in common with other folks rather than being like, oh, they probably wouldn't like me because like this is their background, this is mine, or they're interested in these things and I'm interested in these other things. That's a mindset that is going to keep you from being able to have the kind of connections with others that you want. Like there's always something where you can join with another person. And so having that lens on where you emphasize similarity instead of difference is also valuable. And then again, another thing that's a whole talk in and of itself is if you think somebody's mad at you or they don't like you or that they were acting like a jerk or whatnot, chances are good that it's just not that deep, that they weren't trying to be a jerk, they weren't trying to be dismissive, like that they actually are invested, and there's just a misunderstanding there. And so I encourage people to look at the overall trend. Like if somebody generally acts like they dig you and enjoy spending time with you, and then one time they're sort of distant, appear uninvested, there's probably something going on. Not that they've decided that they hate you and never want to talk to you again. All right. So as we're winding down here, here's your big takeaway points. Relationships are not a luxury. Like so with the health related issues there, that they're just as necessary as exercise, healthful eating, any other aspect of maintaining wellness. You got to be planful, proactive, and patient in cultivating your connections with other folks. And you got to be compassionate toward yourself, towards one another, like assuming positive intent, being kind towards yourself with the awkwardness, and adjusting your expectations for how things are going to go. Like nothing is ever going to be perfect. Definitely not during the dumpster fire that is pandemic times. So just be as okay with progressively approximating what you want in every aspect of your life, including your relationships. So as we're wrapping it all up here, I wanted to yammer so much more than that, but I'm trying to be respectful of the time. I want y'all to just remember, be a cat. Be a cat, right? You're cool, you're interesting. People will like you, you will like them, you will find your crew. It will be great. You just got to trust in your awesomeness and like put the work in to make those connections happen and be kind to yourself and to others. And trust that just because it's hard and slow doesn't mean that it's not worth it or that it's not going well. Like all good things take time, basically. So, all right, that's it, y'all. If you need some additional support around any of the stuff, I want you to like reach out to us at the Department of Mental Health Services. We've got our new learner portal there where you can contact us, or you can reach out to us by, old school actual telephone. If you don't have any questions that I could help with, like you can send me a message in the chat, or you can reach me via the portal there. I'm always happy to geek out about things or provide some support because, like I said, these are challenging things and they create a lot of angst for folks. So as long as you're being compassionate with yourself and with the people around you, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing.